Thank you all very much, and we will resume our proceedings. Council, you have the floor, and I hope there wouldn't be any more light interruptions of that one. I hope we continue to get the service. Okay, Council, you may continue, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Mr. Gomez. Can I remind you that you're still under oath? Please don't forget to use your mic. Mr. Chairman, would the commissioners like to ask questions before I proceed, or can I proceed with my questioning?
I think you may proceed, and towards the end of this session, commissioners would have the opportunity to do so. We have 90 minutes to go, maybe 5 minutes before the end of that period, if you would give us the opportunity to ask questions if we have any. You may proceed, please, Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gomez, we left off prior to the break at the point where it was the day before the coup, and you drove home with soldiers, including Yahya Jammeh, and you went home. Did anything happen that night?
Referring to the night of the 21st?
Indeed, that is correct.
No, not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. When I went home, that was it.
So we'll move to the next day, the 22nd. Can you tell us what happened that day?
Yes, on the 22nd, as usual, I left home, bid my family goodbye. As usual, I am always at Yundum by 7:30, or 7 is 7:30. And I think this is one trait that I developed all throughout my career now. And when I reach the barracks, Yundum barracks, I passed the sentry and I saw some hesitancy. Of course, I didn't need to stand to be complimented. I mean, I was passing the sentry at the gate was to compliment, as usual, any officer coming in, including myself.
Sorry, just to interrupt you, what is a sentry, just for the purposes of everyone here?
Is the person on duty. Every day in a barracks, there is a 24-hour security, and the sentry is the person who is standing at the point he is posted to take guard. That is the sentry.
Thank you for that clarification. You may proceed.
So I just noted in my mind that the way he complimented was hesitant and a bit sloppy. And to me, that is a problem. But I was passing, and I recorded in my mind that the moment I reach my office, I will call the RSM. RSM is Regimental Sergeant Major. In the battalion, he is the senior most soldier. Of course, when I say soldier, I'm referring to other ranks, those who are non-commissioned. Commission, of course, is those who have stars on their shoulders. Anybody who doesn't is regarded as non-commissioned. So I said I was going to do that, but when I passed, if you're familiar with Yundum Barracks, then the gate, the moment you enter the gate, you're facing the guard room. A guard room is where it's like a reception in civil parlance. But the guard room had functions. The function is that it houses all those sentries, all those soldiers who are on duty for that particular 24 hours. The second function it has is that it is the point of call for anybody visiting the barracks. So, looking at the distance, I saw Yaya Jame and so many other soldiers in different mixed dress attire.
Was
So
that unusual?
It would have been under normal circumstances, but on this date it would not be. Because normally, like I said earlier, that today we are starting this exercise. And it is common in the military. You have enemy forces and friendly forces. You call it red forces, enemy forces, and friendly forces. So I thought that this was the group that are being prepared to go and act as enemy forces with the impending training with the American Marines. Because of the way they were dressed, civil with mixed dress. Army, normally you don't dress like that. So, of course, he was in all those sort of paraphernalias. He was chewing something, had some cloth tied on his head. Other soldiers are dressed similarly. So by the time I reached the point of the guard room, I would have turned right to go to my office. And it was at that junction, that they rushed me. Edward and his group rushed me, and arrested me at that point. So for me, I am still not sure whether it is the script of the training that has started, but when they did that, they arrested me and took me to the guard room. And
So is it correct that the exercise provided a good cover for what would happen subsequently? Because would you have reacted the same way had it not been for the exercise?
no, I think probably, because under normal circumstances, without that exercise, you would have noticed that at the very, very, very onset. Just like I have noticed that sloppy way of saluting I received from the sentry. So that would not have been the case at all. So when I was arrested, I was taken to, my briefcase was taken away from me immediately. So I was taken by those soldiers who arrested me and took me to the guard room in the cells and locked me up.
You mentioned that you were arrested by Edward and other men. How many men are we talking about?
I'm not sure of the number, but what I'm trying to explain is, in the army you call it an ambush. An ambush is just men lay in wait for you at a certain critical juncture where you will obviously pass, and then they will, under normal, if it was war, they will shoot at you. In this case, they were lying in wait for me to be arrested.
So you said they arrested you. Can you explain to us who did what?
No, I think it was, well, they were briefed what to do, the men. These are soldiers. They were briefed what to do, and when I reached that point, I was rushed, and then they grabbed me.
Who grabbed you?
The men with Edward Singate. He is an officer, he will not do that. That's, reserved for soldiers to do something like that. But they were under his command.
So how did they grab you, and where did they take you next?
No, what happened was, it's not even physical grab, but they are with weapons. And when they come with their weapons, they will point their weapons to you and hold you up at that point. So with that, I stopped, and then they took my bag, and then, escort me, if I should call it that way, escort me to the guard room and lock me up in the cells.
Can you describe to us where the guard room is located within the barracks itself?
Yes, that was what I was trying to describe at the beginning, and that's why I said then, because it's changed. The gate was about 50 plus meters to the guard room. Of course, it's strategically located so that when you report to the barracks, that's where you first go. So that's, I think it was probably about 50 meters or so from the gate. And when you enter the barracks, it's one of the first, of course the armory is on the right, you pass the armory on the far right, but the guard room is what will take your attention.
So you said they grabbed you and they were holding weapons. Did they rough you up in any way?
Well, not rough up as in physically, they didn't do that, but at least you know their intention, that they had weapons and they wanted you to take your attention, and that was what they did.
So at the time that they grabbed you and took you to the guard room, at that stage, did you know what was happening?
No, until now I didn't know what happened, because it was still this confusion that whether this was all part of the script for the training. But then when I was locked up, then it started to dawn on me that probably this is not. And I remembered, of course, I just didn't give up that way. I immediately went to the peephole. The first soldier I called, I saw, I can't remember who it was, but I thought it was one private sir. I told him to go and check with the RSM, to find the RSM and find out what is going on. He didn't come back. I saw somebody else, I think one private bar. I asked him to do the same, to go outside, because now it's dawning on me, because when I entered, I met the duty officer for that night, who was Lieutenant Obimbai, who explained to me what happened. And that was when I started getting men to go and find the RSM. Or the second person I called, I called just Ba. I asked him to run outside to try and get help.
So before we proceed further, I just want to find out, what did Lieutenant Obimbai say to you?
That he was on duties, of course, because what it means as a duty officer, it means you will be the officer for that night that will spend the night in the barracks. Officers don't spend the night in the barracks. It is only the duty officer who stays the night with the detail of the security guards at the barracks. So it was his turn that night of 21st. So when I met him in the cell, he explained to me what happened, that he was met at the officers' mess and arrested and asked and escorted to the cells, that this is what is going to happen, there is a coup, and that they're going to take the country. Excuse me.
So he was informed the night before that a coup, when he was arrested the night before, he was informed that what was happening was a coup.
No, I'm not sure whether it was the night before, but I met him in the cells, that he was arrested and brought in to the coup. When, at what time, actually, I don't know.
You mentioned Edward Sinyate at the time. What was his rank?
He was a second lieutenant.
So let's take it step by step. You're in the guard room and you found Lieutenant Obimbai. Can you give us a description of the guard room itself?
At that time, I was not in the guard room. I was in the cells in the guard room.
Can you describe the cells in the guard room then?
Well, the cells is meant to, as a normal cell, is meant for people who misbehave and they're kept, or people who are charged with offenses. And this is where they are kept within the military. You have these things because you take people to trial within the military, within the army, and then when you're when you're found to be liable to time in cells, that's where you're kept. So a cell is like that. When you enter, there is a wide room, And then you have this, I think it's about 1, 2, 3 cells or so at the time. I don't know what it is now. So there was a couple of cells to keep people.
So now you're inside the cell and you have a bit of time. What was going through your mind at the time? Now putting everything in context, the conversation you had with Yaya Jammeh the night before, seeing him there in the morning, being arrested by Edward Sinyate. While you were in the cell, what was going through your mind?
At this time, it began to dawn on me that actually this is real, that actually the rumors are now coming into effect. It was not about Jammeh anymore, but it was about how do you stop this immediately? And that was why I went into instinctively looking for other soldiers who could do something. But then I realized the futility about it, because it looked like everybody was also into it at the time. I mean, those people who were already at the guard room and at the barracks. So I thought security-wise it's no longer prudent to continue that adventure. And I stopped and resigned to my fate.
At the time, did you think that the coup would succeed?
No. I had no doubt that this will never take off. One, these are very junior officers. Number two, the advantage is that one, to not succeeding, is that you have so many other officers who are going to report to the barracks that day, and I believe that they will do something to quell this immediately. Apart from that, you have all the other services, apart from the army, who would be knowing this immediately, and it means all those officers and soldiers who are supposed to come to the barracks, including all the services, this group of people cannot withstand such a pressure. They will give it. So I had no doubt that it will not succeed at all. I had no doubt that this will fail.
So that morning while you were in the cell, did anything happen while you were there?
Yes, as officers come in, I see every time an officer comes in, you succumb, you join. But then before this, immediately I was in the cell, Edward rushed back to the guard room and then shouted my name, that I should be brought out. And then they bring me out. He was asking for the armory keys. So it surprised me, because I know, immediately I thought even I'm already getting into being set up, particularly if it is Edward, because of our encounters, and I know Edward's temperament. And then I thought, maybe I am being set up. So I said, what are you talking about? He said, look, I am not joking. And then he immediately released a burst of round, and I could hear the rounds flying on my head. And I think this is the first shot of the coup d'etat. And to me, it was, I was a bit confused. So I asked for my bag. I said, well, you arrested me, you had my briefcase, and the keys are kept in the briefcase. So they brought my bag. It was already torn into shreds. And so I checked, because there is a secret compartment, a secret zip, which in my briefcase where I normally keep the keys safe. So I opened it. Luckily, these keys were there. Immediately, I took the keys out. They grabbed it away from me. I was returned to the cells, and then they ran with the keys. Of course, it's obvious. At the time, what they had were only the weapons of the guards. Now, they have the keys to the armory, so that's what they did.
So you said that Edward shot a few rounds, and it was past your head. And you said you knew his temperament. What do you mean by that? What was his temperament? Please take your time, Mr. Gomez.
When he did that, he said, I'm not going to miss again.
I can understand that this is a very difficult experience, so please take your time. If you would like a break, please let us know, but please take your time. I will move forward to the next question unless you would like to answer. Okay.
So when he did that, I thought his intention was going to be obvious, because I know Edward has always been very bitter. For what? I don't know. Maybe it's because of his circumstances or what, but that is what I meant by his temperament. And you could see he was hungry and rushed to do something. And when, of course, he got the keys, he went and opened the armory, and that was history. They took the arms that they needed to do what they wanted to do. And what again disappointed me was that every officer that came just gave in, just like that. Officers who came, you were either asked, either you join or you will be locked up, and everybody was just joining like that. And all the ones that I recollect, one like Momodu Sonko, that's where he joined. And I think if looking at Suarez's testimony yesterday, I think he was trying to describe that he was in a different uniform. Of course, he was an officer coming from home to work. It will be different from those people who were ready in fighting order. So I think that was the difference that he was trying to explain.
Apart from Sanko, do you recall any other persons you saw being, should I say, co-opted or convinced to join the coup? Do you recall any other names?
No, he's stuck in my mind, and because there was a bit of exchange, they either trusted him, don't trust him, and that was why this stick in my mind for this long. But I think so many others did. I don't know who else, but some were also locked up with us because they wouldn't trust them at all. And I think at some point, Jammeh made an attempt to come and open me up. Most of them will not agree. Some of them I think he made that attempt once or twice, but not everybody will agree to him taking me out of the cells. And I guess because they don't trust that I will be with them, because I think I know also that they know I will not be with them, because that's not my training.
So before I ask you more questions in relation to that, when you described Edward Sinyate and the way he was acting, was he acting in a sober manner at that point in time? How would you describe his disposition?
Yes, he was sober. He was sober at that point in time, yes.
And you said that Jammeh wanted to open the cells in order for you to come out, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall the conversation at the time? Did he say anything to you at all?
No, no, he didn't say. Of course, we were all certain that why are we being locked up? What have we done? And I think for him, the way I looked at it now, is that having me on their side is better. But then every other person believe that that is not what the risk, and that's why whenever he comes in to open the door, everybody else will disagree, and then he will go back. That's what I was trying to explain.
Why do you think that he would have believed that having you on their side would be better than not having you on their side?
I think it's because of my training. I always believe I have been privileged to have been one of the most trained army officers at that time, up to my rank, because of the training that I've gone, the type of training that I've done, the level of fitness that I've displayed all the time, and I think this would have been a plus to them.
So you were in the detention cell on the 22nd. Did anything else happen that day?
No, apart from that, I think they left to go out of the barracks. It's just the occasional news that came, and every time you want to believe at some point they will get stiff resistance or being stopped, you hear the contrary. For instance, at Fajara Barracks, you would have thought there would be stiff resistance. When you hear Fajara Barracks, they will tell you they've taken Fajara Barracks, they have gone here, they've done this. And to your utter surprise that this was just like that. And I'm not surprised when I saw Amadou Suarez's testimony. I was not surprised at all.
How were you able to receive news of what was happening while you're in the cell?
Well, remember, up till that time, we were army officers. I mean, there are soldiers who will trickle in information. You are in a cell, but you're also in a guard room. You'll hear people discussing. This is what I mean, tidbits of information coming in.
So how much time did you spend in the cell?
We were in this particular cell in Yundum for 2 nights, Friday night, Saturday night, until Sunday night for Monday morning. Somewhere at wee hours of the morning, around 2, 3, that was when we were driven. We were not told where we were going again. We were just told, escorted with armed soldiers, and a bus was brought in. We were put in this bus and then been driven away. Where we were going, we didn't know. And so many things, of course, run in our minds because this is a coup d'etat. Examples of Ghana, Jerry Lawrence coup was already everywhere. And then, you were being taken at the middle of the night at that time. So many things went in our heads. And then we found ourselves in Mile 2. That's when we were transferred to Mile 2. Even here, of course, being at the middle of the night, you don't know where you are. Of course, you've never been into Mile 2. It was only in the morning that it became clear that you were in Mile 2 prisons.
So I want to focus on the period that you were in detention in the cell at Yundum Barracks. Can you tell us a bit about what was happening there? Who was in charge at the time? Were you aware of that?
At this time, I mean, it's just the flow of the coup. I can't remember who was particularly in charge, but I know at this time too, most of the junior officers who were part of the coup started to take field ranks. Field ranks are ranks that you take when you are in war or fighting situation, and then there are ranks that are needed in the field to continue the command structure. And I've seen a lot of soldiers, NCOs taking up field ranks to occupy this officers' cadre. but particularly who it was, specifically who was, I can't remember now.
While you were there during the essentially 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, how were basic necessities provided to you? Were you given food to eat? Were you given water? How did that function?
Yeah, it became the normal routine food from the general kitchen, normal tea, whatever. These were the things that were brought for us. When lunch is ready, they'll get lunch from the kitchen to bring lunch. This was what was happening.
Were you able to communicate with your family at that time? Did they know?
Are you still referring to the cells at Yundum?
Precisely, yes.
Well, at this time, I don't think we would have even allowed ourselves, our families, to come to these places. We were not allowed that way. Somebody who just bundle you in a cell doesn't give you such a privilege at all. Not even stepping out the cell. Throughout these 2 nights, you had no privilege to step out anywhere. We were constantly in the cells throughout.
My question was about communication with your family. Did you have a mobile phone with you at the time? Were you able to communicate or send messages to your family? That's what I'm driving at.
Yes, I was very quiet because I don't think this would never happen. It would never cross their minds even. We were looked at as enemies and prisoners, and for them, these were no privileges that we will never have at that point.
So during that 3-day period, you had no contact with your family. What was going through your mind about what was happening in the country and your family?
Well, first, this news blackout, because my family knows that I left for work. I'm supposed to return, and that didn't happen. And then they would have known that a coup has happened, and then they didn't see me coming home. You could imagine what will go through your family and your loved ones. And particularly that there was complete news blackout as to what happened. The notion that you don't know, where they didn't know whether I was alive or not, that is also something so terrifying.
You told us that you were confined to that space for the entire period. You weren't allowed to go out. Were other people brought in to the cells while you were there?
Yes, because apart from myself and Obimbai, he's the only one I can recall now. But I know it was when we were leaving, we were being escorted out at that night. We were more than just the 2 of us. Who else I can't recall now? I can't remember now.
Do you remember if it was a lot of people or just a few people?
Some few people.
So you told us that you were taken very early, wee hours of the morning on Monday, and you were taken to Mile 2. Did you observe anything along the way? I'm sure it was dark, but did anything happen along the way?
No, nothing happened. We were not even allowed that luxury of looking at anywhere. I remember that we were just asked to stay focused on the floor of the bus, not to look at anywhere. And it was, of course, dark. You will hardly see anything that was happening.
And you said at the time the uncertainty of where you were going or what was happening to you weighed on your mind. How did you feel at that time?
Yes, a coup has just happened. African militaries and coup, the tendencies of going violent is very, very prevalent, very, very, very present. And you're just transported from, a cell at the middle of the night and taking somewhere else where you don't know. That was really frightening. But of course, at the end of the day, there's not much you could do. This is your fate, your situation now. No matter what happened, you will have to take it. And that was what happened. We just didn't know where we were taken. That alone was something else.
When you arrived at mile 2, what happened next?
Well, it seems that they were already briefed because there was a receiving party from the prisons. Prison wardens were waiting for us, and we were escorted to the cells that we were prepared for, and that is this cell, cell number security wing number 4. These are death row prisons, cells.
When you arrived at mile 2, were you processed?
Well, I think by process you mean whether documentations were done or we were told this never happened. We were just bundled in our cells and locked up.
At that point in time, could you identify who was in charge?
No, I can't remember now. I can't remember now. All I know was that being escorted from Yundum by soldiers, at mile 2 we were handed over to prison wardens who transferred us to our respective cells. I have been in cell number 3 throughout.
So you arrived at mile 2, very early hours of the morning. You weren't told why you were being detained. You were taken to security wing number 4 and put in cell number 3. What happened?
Well, the military officer, of course the guards I can't remember, the wardens I couldn't remember. The military officer who brought us was Captain Durcham. And when he brought us, not only did he hand it over, but of course, being military personnel, they escorted us along with the prison warden right to our cells. And I remember him in a cell of concrete and cement. I couldn't see why it was necessary for an army officer that just yesterday you would have laid your life for, standing up on the bed, trying to take his bayonet to check whether the concrete ceiling is strong enough or not. I think these were the first shocks that begin to dawn on you that something is seriously wrong. This is a captain. I would have expected second lieutenants to do something like that. Why? Because it is just genius who have staged a coup. Why should you be so exuberant to go up and try to choke concrete ceilings to test who are you trying to prove loyalty to at this period of time? But this is what happened. And then we were, in
Please take your time, Mr. Gomez. This is a very difficult experience. If you need a few moments, we can wait.
The betrayal you feel from officers. That you would have laid your life for was just something indescribable. And then the sinking feeling you have of the unknown when that door is bang, clang, locked up on you, someone who woke up on a fateful day, had nothing in your mind apart from going to serve your country, That was total.
Considering all those thoughts that were going through your mind at the time, and the fact that you were in a very new environment, how did you react for the first few hours while you were in your detention cell?
I mean, to contextualize it is that you begin to wonder that all your intention had been, because that was the conscious decision I took as an army officer that day when I stood at the control tower and thought probably this is time to serve my country in this way. That I will be ready, I'll make myself ready and leave everything personal about me and consign myself to service. I work hard. I left my job. I went to the army from zero. And I deliberately did that to go through the ranks. And I reached that pinnacle where I was. Just like that. Of course, when I took that conscious decision, I knew it will call for my blood, for my sweat, and for my life when it was required. But such a betrayal from people you call your colleagues, people that you thought if it warranted you will take that bullet for them to behave in this manner. And that was why you will see, even at the beginning when we started this discussion, I was trying to shift this discussion away from the idea that this is because some Nigerians were here. I don't think this is. This is just some miscreant, some people who thought it is in their way to take shortcut in life and betray the trust this country had in them. That is what I thought. And I think anything else will dilute it. Anything else will dilute it.
I'd like to focus on what happened while you were at Mile 2. When you arrived, were you aware of the other prisoners who were in your security wing, that is security wing number 4?
At this particular point in time, I know I came with some. I still remember Ubimbai, who was, I think, in cell number 102. I was in 3. But at this point in time, there are so many other things that dawn on you. What is going to happen? Where you are locked up, a cell that is barely 1 meter by 2 meter, 1 meter by, if you make like this, you will, your hands will almost be touching, and I think the length is about 2 meters. A plank of wood for bed, and a cell that has only a peephole, which bears no mosquito gauze, is infested. These are the things that start to dawn on you. What have you done wrong? How could this happen? What is going to happen? You have this sinking feeling, so this takes your energy. It is only through the course of the day, you start seeing people being bundled up and brought in, you know, one after the other. Then you start to recognize your environment. But your environment, of course, at that time is just this cell that I'm trying to describe, and nothing else.
You've described the cell that you were in and the fact that you saw people being bundled up and coming in as time went by. Do you recall some of the people who were brought in to Mile 2 prison?
Yes, I know at some point it ended up being, I know Chongan, I know Samsar, because those were the Samsar and Mama Cham came, because at some point I think they said they were ministers, but I think just the following day they were arrested and brought in. Chonga and Pres Jan were there, RSM5 was there, and Diba, NSS DG was there too. I think some couple of civilians were also put in, but in my mind these are the people that I could recall it.
You've mentioned quite a number of people, and I just wanted to make sure that we have all their full names to the extent that you remember, as well as their rank, if you could.
Obimbai was the second lieutenant. Fai is the RSM.
Do you recall Fai's name, first name?
Who?
Fai, the first name?
Fai. RSM Fai, no. You know, the problem with the military is you're more familiar with second names and ranks all the time. But it's not Babukar, no. I can't remember. Maybe in the course of this thing it will come. But RSM Fai, Pasala Jain, the IGP, the AIG Chongan, I think came also, was there also. Samsar was it a captain at the time? Yes, I think he was a captain at the time too. I think Captain Johnson was also brought in. You remember Johnson I referred to at Farafenye when he had that accident. Even when he was there, he had this, you know, collar with him. These people, I think, at that material time, they were already in the cell. They were in the cells with us.
While you were inside the cell, you mentioned that you didn't go out. How long were you kept in the cell before the first time that you went out of your cell?
Well, I think for us, the situation got dire every time. We dread nights because the experience you have because of the exposure to the elements, the exposure to mosquitoes and infestations. We were there for 7 days when the Red Cross, that was the only time we had relief. The Red Cross, of course, our thanks to Alassane. I think he was the head of the Gambian head of the Red Cross here. And their insistence, constant insistence on having to pay that visit to us. I think that was what saved the day, that this ordeal that we were for 7 days ended. When they visited us, that was the first time too, there was some form of documentation by the Red Cross.
So I'll come back to what happened after the Red Cross came to see you. But for those 7 days that you were in the cell, I'll ask, were you allowed to take a shower?
Yeah, I guess that was one of the luxuries they wouldn't allow us to do, for reasons that probably they will believe. The idea was just to lock us up, and probably too they thought that's the instructions they got from the military, lock them up, maybe too because they are afraid, but there was nothing like that. We were always locked. The only time that the gate of security wing number 4 is open is when there is need in the morning for breakfast. And when they change the chamber pots that were given to us to use when we want to ease ourselves, that is the only time that you see people or the gates are open. But for us, our cell doors remain locked throughout the 7 days.
How would you describe the type of food that you were given to eat?
Prison food, I don't understand. I don't understand how anybody could be fed with such a diet and call it a food at all. In the morning, it's called pap. Of course, if you say pap, you will conjure something, but that is completely different. I don't know what they use to cook it. Then in lunch, dinner is chere. We end up calling it wet or dry because, and then we will always go for the dry because when you say wet, it means chere with sauce. But of course, I'm calling it this way for lack of a better word to describe them. But this is not what you could really eat at all. So we end up insisting that food be brought for us from home. Of course, during these first 7 days, you don't even dare talk about that because the idea was to survive. Even no matter how bad the food was, the idea was to survive. And we keep telling each other, eat whatever you have because you don't know what will happen again. But then, of course, this started to change after the 7 days when the Red Cross came. Then we started to go escorted individually to go and shower, to come back in the cell and you're locked up. Then the next person is escorted out, and that was how things started to change.
After the Red Cross came, 7 days later, were you able to communicate with your family at all?
No, up to this point, we had no communication at all with our families. They don't know, I'm not sure whether they know where we were at all at this point. We had no communications with our family at this point.
So you mentioned that after the Red Cross came, then you were able to take a shower. Did anything else change in terms of your condition?
Yes, the conditions of keeping us there began to ease up. We begin to have a regular shower daily, but then even at that, it will mean you'll have to. It's almost like a line because if you have all those cells, any one person who needs to get to the restroom. In the morning, you start with number 1, he will go, then the next, he will be brought back, locked up, and then the next person. That is how it started. Of course, it will go to an end during the course of our stay there when it eases up, but then again, immediately there's something happen, you go down to full lockdown, all those privileges are taken away again, as if you are the one who had created something. So this is how we were being handled at Mile 2 all the time.
You mentioned the mosquito-infested cells. In terms of clothing, what were you allowed to wear? What did you have? At
this point, I had only the uniform that I came with, and well, thank God you had the uniform, because at night it becomes the only defense you have. And throughout this is what we were using. It was only after that they start probably getting out the information, declaring that we are held here, and then we started to get clothing. I can't recall now which began, whether we got clothing and or the easing of the the time we spent, the conditions, but it progressed from here. I know the testimonies of Chongan will be more detailed and well scripted than my recollection will be. But then the point is that from after the 7 days to the durations of our stay at Mile 2, it began to ease up. But then again, these are punctuated by the situations on the ground in the country. Wherever you have a situation, then we go down, all those privileges are removed, and then you get back to being locked up. Of course, there were periods too when we were even allowed exercises. There were periods too when we even had the privilege of playing games, because I remember there was a table tennis table that was brought in.
In those first 7 days, were you able to pray, for instance?
Well, I had this question of prayer, I think, with one other witness. But prayer, nobody could take away from you, simply because you were locked up in your cell, and praying becomes the only recourse that you had. The other goodie that you had after the 7 days was the Quran. And like I think in Chongan's testimony, it's one of the things that you recourse to immediately. And again, this is where we try to rediscover our faith and get close to our God.
Apart from prayer, was there anything else that you relied upon to cope with your situation?
Yes, like I said, it began to ease, and I think even at some point we got mats, I think Quran, prayer beads, brought in that it is coming from the junta, that, things, supplies like that. I think there was a time that this happened. And then occasionally you start to get army officers coming in to check, to visit, and things like that.
You mentioned on the first day seeing Captain Dursham. Did you see him again after that first day?
Oh yes, I mean, I think just the following day or just a couple of days after, he was also brought in and to join us. And for us, I think not justice or so, you can say that, but I think it dawned on him that this was useless exercise that he was joining in. So he was brought in also to Mile 2, arrested and detained with us. Let me also add that during this period, after the 7 days, officers, some were brought in, some were also released immediately. Like I think people like Obimbai didn't stay that long. I think RSM 5 also, some people started to come in and others being released and reinstated to the army.
Can we do a similar thing with some of the people who were brought in? Do you remember the names of some of the people who were brought in, or their rank, or who they were?
At this point, I'm not sure whether I can remember those details. I can't remember those details anymore now.
So you arrived in Mile 2. We're still in July 1994. In the first few months of your time in Mile 2, did anything of significance happen?
I think some of those will be the incidences of September 6th, when we were visited at night, and the entire junta was there, apart from Yaya Jammeh.
Can you please name them?
Sana Sabali, Edward Singate, Peter Singate, of course he was not part of Jijuncha, but he was there. Kante, I can't remember his name again, Yankuba Ture, Sadibu Haidara. At night. And for me, again, my encounter with Edward, he came, the moment he got into the room, he started, where is Adjutant Gomez? Where is Adjutant Gomez? Of course, three cells from the gate. Stand up, so I stood up. And then he came pointing his weapon, his rifle to me again. And this time I accosted him that, look, this is the second time you're pointing your weapon at chest to me, and I think you should stop. This is unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman. You cannot do this. This is against the law. So, of course, he was drunk to his head. And for me, of course, I'm locked up in a cell. Where will I go? What should I do? And I accosted him that way. And I think it was one of the entourage who convinced him to leave. But this was what happened. He came to my cell, pointed his weapon at me, as if I just didn't understand what happened. What have I done to Edward?
When he did that, did he say anything to you?
Yes, he said last time I shot, I missed. This time I'm not going to. So I told him, look, that's when I told him that this is the second time you're pointing your weapon to me. You cannot be doing this. You cannot do this.
You said after that, then someone called and distracted him. Is that correct?
Yes, I think I think that was the intention, because he said, no, leave him, he'll have his time. He'll have his turn. And I think immediately after that, I saw they start taking out, opening cells. I think it was even the Commissioner of Prisons or the deputy who was with them, opening this cell, and I think that's where Mama Cham, Chongan, and RSM 5 were dragged out of their cells, beaten mercilessly. It was just so horrible, so horrendous, that officers of this rank, of this caliber, would be meted out that bestial torture, I mean, by fellow officers, is just something else. They were dragged outside, and each time they drag one, and then they execute you. Of course, at hindsight now we knew, but at that material time, that point in time, this was our feeling, that they have started executions. They drag one after the other and did these executions. Unbeknown to us, of course, they were mock executions, which we knew well later, 45 days later. But this was what happened. And this night, I don't think anybody in Mile 2, I mean, as a detainee at that time, will ever forget this night in your life. Visited that you are in a prison, all those rules of prisons were violated, that access were being done against you, that the prison is facilitating such an access at this time, and that people are being dragged out, tortured, beaten, and then executed. It was just something else. It was just something else. And to add to that, when they were leaving after these three, Edward shouted again, Adjutant Gomez, we are coming for you next. Well, I know I cannot bust the ceiling, I cannot bust the prisons and go out. So I just said, well, of course I just lie down there. But what goes through you, having witnessed execution like that, I think that's the climax of torture. I think I'm not going to compare this to what I've seen my fellow officers being dragged out and beaten in terms of torture. But the equivalence of psychological torture, that is the climax. That was extreme.
You've provided us with a lot of information, so I want to focus on that particular incident and ask you a few more questions. You mentioned that the members of junta came, as well as Peter Sinyate. Were there with any other individuals? You mentioned the commissioner of prisons. What was his name?
I don't think it was the commissioner. I think it was the deputy commissioner, because during that period, I think there were some dismissals, because it was later that we learned it was actually the previous night that they have visited. I think the night of the 5th they visited, but I think the person who was responsible for the keys left. So I think there was some either dismissals or so, but when that night of the 6th, I think it was Antu Seidi, I think he was the person who came with them and opening the cells for them. They handcuff each person, drag you out, and beat you mercilessly.
So apart from the people we've mentioned, the members of the junta, Peter Sinyate, Anton Seidi, was there any other individual with the group where...
Yes, I mentioned Lieutenant Kante. I can't remember the first name now. And then you will remember that these are already the junta. It means they will come with an entourage of their own bodyguards, each one of them. So you can imagine the amount of soldiers that were there. So there were lots of soldiers. Each member, Edward, Haidara, Yankuba, all of them came with the details of their bodyguards into the cell. Who they are, their names, I can't remember now, but it would not be difficult to trace who were their details at that time, their security details at that time.
From where you were, could you see if these people were all involved in what was going on? You mentioned beatings and executions. Do you know if all of these individuals were involved in that from where you were?
Particularly the men. Occasionally, of course, 1 or 2 officers will join in, but I know particularly those things are left to the men to do, but they were being supervised by the officers who were there. And yes, my cell was cell number 3. When you enter, it's the left, 1, 2, 3. So anybody who's been dragged out, you will have to cross my cell. I was seeing them.
So I want to take each incident step by step. So let's start with the first person who was taken out of the cell. Do you recall who that was?
I am not sure of the order in which they came, but I know Mama Cham was dragged out that way, beaten mercilessly, kicked at left, right, and center. Each one of them was also the same. I guess depends on the severity or the acrimony you have against the particular officer. Mama Cham probably because he was just he was one of those first people sacked and then brought back. But I can't recall anymore who else was particularly involved in the beating. But I know it was the soldiers that were with them that participated in this, with the supervision of the officers.
Still focusing on the beatings, you mentioned that they were being kicked. Was anything else done in relation to how they were beaten?
Yes, a soldier with rifles. These are the 2 things that you will use, your boots and your rifle butt. And this is what they were using to mete out these beatings against these 3 people.
Apart from the 3 people that you've mentioned, do you recall if anyone else was dragged out of their cell and beaten?
No, this night of the 6th, it was only these 3 that they did. And after that, they left, and that was when Edward shouted that they're coming for me next.
You mentioned that there were executions, is that correct?
Yes, yes. Why I said this is because at that point, there was nothing that convinced me that this was not execution. Because when they were dragged out, there were a volley of rifles fired in the yard, and then they will come back and take the second person, and then drag him out, go through the beatings, take him out, and then do the same routine, volley of rounds fired, a long burst of fire, long sustained rounds of fire, and then they will come the third person. When they left, they locked us up and went, and then told us that they're coming for me next. So for me, this was execution that started. And of course, we were never allowed again all those privileges of moving out everywhere. So we didn't know until 45 days later that these people were never executed. They were just transferred to security wing number 1. This happened because at this point in time, it was the time when they brought in Sana Sabali and Sadibu Haidara arrested.
So just to make sure it's clear, you mentioned the beatings and then you mentioned the executions. In relation to the executions, are we talking about the same individuals who were beaten, or we're talking about different individuals?
No, I'm referring to Mama Cham, Chongan, and RSM Jeng.
Just to clarify, are you referring to RSM Jeng or Fai? I feel like there's a confusion.
I understand. I know that RSM Jeng was brought in later. I was just about to interject and say this because RSM Jeng, but because I think by this time RSM 5 was already released. RSM Jeng was brought in when actually within this time I can't recall, but he was part of those who were beaten and tortured and executed.
So to understand your state of mind at that time, it's dark, you're in your cell, you see individuals being taken out, you hear rounds of gunfire, you see people coming back, taking another individual, you hear rounds of fire, and again it happens again. At that point in time, you didn't see these individuals again. So you felt that those individuals had been executed, is that correct?
Yes, this was my feeling. This was what I thought. In fact, this was the belief we had with all those who were detained at that time.
And you said as members of the junta and their entourage were leaving, Edward Sunyata said to you, you'll be next or we'll come back. Is that correct?
Yes, it was because when you're leaving, again, being on that line, my window is on the part in which you will be moving to go to the gate to leave. So when you shout, I will hear you clearly. And that was when he shouted that Adjutant Gomez were coming for you next.
So still focusing on your state of mind at the time, that happened in the very early hours of the morning, and you never saw any of those individuals again for a period of 45 days. So what was going through your mind during that period?
Well, first, that I was singled out, that they were coming for me. Of course, they never came back. But this harrowing feeling that any time, particularly that 24 hours that they were coming back, when it didn't happen, you believe any time from now they will come back. The other part is that you've just seen the horrendous torture your colleagues has gone through, resulting in their execution. You are not yourself any longer, because nights become a dreaded period, because your safety is always in the morning, because at least when people are coming, you will see them. At nights, you don't sleep at all. because you know somebody is coming to wake you up, drag you, and execute you. This was how we lived throughout this period, particularly these 45 days. And of course, the respite came when they brought in Sana Sabali and Haidara. That was the only time now they had the recourse to go and open security wing number 1, where they've secluded these people, to bring them back into security wing number 4 and reserve that security number 1 for Sadibu Haidara and Sana Sabali.
And we'll come back to when they brought in Sadibu Haidara and Sana Sabali. During that period of 45 days, who else was left in that security wing, number 4?
Well, within this period, there are these goings and comings. I can't recall the details. Some officers were released, I guess, until that 45 days. So I can't recall the details again. But we went back to this, if you could call, normal routine, where morning they will come in to bring breakfast and then get you to go and empty your chamber pot and then get back into your cells. This was the routine that we were living with.
So let's talk about when Sadibu Haidara and Sana Sabali were brought in. Can you tell us who brought them in or what happened on that day?
If I recall, again, I think it was Edward who escorted them or thereabout. I can't remember now, but I know they were brought in these days. During this period too, of course, if we were praying and reading the Quran, this period was intensified. And I remember Turo Jaune, so which means Turo Jaune was also there. Turo Jaune jokingly saying that, well, this is Allahu Akbar Mimbi Kabang. I mean, meaning that we are constantly praying, but when that day happened, I said, no, I think this is a testament that God is with us. Because if you have these people who had brought you in here, now they are escorted in handcuffs and walked in past you and locked up, it means our prayers have already been answered. It's just a matter of time.
I just want to make sure that the record is clear. When you said that Sana and Sadibu were brought in by Edward, who are you referring to? Which Edward?
Edward Singate. This is how I recalled it. I think.
So after they were brought in, did you have any interactions with them?
No, at that time I would not wish to have an interaction with them in the first place, but we did not, because they were also secluded at security wing number 1.
So at that time, roughly how long had you been in prison at Mile 2?
I think this time we were talking about September 6th, 45 days after these people were brought in. That makes it September, October, around November, around that period, I guess. And then, so it will be about that. It was September 6th, 45 days later these people were brought back to security wing number 4. Sana Sabali and Sadibu Haidara were brought in.
So by that time, you had spent considerable amount of time in prison. Is there anything you would describe as routine in terms of prison life? Is there anything that stands out to you during that period?
Well, apart from prayers became very routine that we all do, but on the prison side, visitations starts. Visitations, I mean the authorities coming in once a while, and then of course the other routines of bringing in food, allowing you some time to rest outside. These things began to happen in one form or the at one point in time or not. And like I said, it led to times when, you know, it was only very few times that you will stay locked up. Most of the time they will allow you to stay out from, from morning all the way to evening. These were also times when we were allowed exercises, which I try to lead all the detainees into exercising all the time, playing table tennis, which a table was brought in. And then even some relaxation started to happen after too, when we, there was even some point when you could really get the guards, the wardens, to lock 2 detainees in one cell. I know I have done that a lot with Chongan when we used to play chess and Scrabble together.
What about in terms of sounds? Were there any noises that became routine to you while you were in prison during that time?
Yes, the only noise, and to our believing that God was on our side, was that immediately after Sana Sabali and Sadibu Hydra were brought in, some moments later, you have entourage coming in to conduct torture on them. I know Martin was part of the details. The prisons also will be...
Which Martin? Sorry to interrupt you.
I think he's now General Martin of the Gambia National Army. He was always coming. There was also this, the prison officer who used to go with them. This one, is it Pa Jawando or Pa Fai? I think it was Pa Fai. There was one of these who was, Ndao, prison warden Ndao, I think it's Ndao. I'm getting the names mixed up now, but I think he lives in Bakau. So they used to escort them, take them, I think, away from prison security wing number 1 to the other security wing. I think is the adjacent security wing, whether it's 5 or not, I don't know. And this is the first time for me. Of course, when you stand on your bed and look at the window, you will see them passing. And for me, I think this is the first time I see what I believe is an electric shock machine that was used, being carried along with them. And then you will hear all the shouting, all the cries of these people. And for me, like I refer to my exchange with Turo Jaune, that these are signs that God is on our side. Probably God has a bigger mission for us, the detainees. Because we have been here, apart from this incident of night of the 6th, nobody has come in to mete out such a torture to us that you will hear us shouting and wheeling all throughout the prison yard. So maybe too, you know, there is some divine message to us that we should be patient more.
I'm mindful of the time, so I will just ask one quick question and then cede the floor to the commissioners. You mentioned Martin, and you don't recall his name. Do you recall what his rank or role was at the time?
At the time, I wouldn't recall, but Alaji Martin is now, I think, a general in the army. He was from the Gendarmerie. I think that's why I can't recall the rank clearly, but he was at the Gendarmerie at the time, or the Gendarmerie at the time.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Chairman, I cede the floor to the commissioners for questions.
Thank you very much, Council. The legal team is always conscious of the time involved and mindful of that. I thank you for that. Before we take our take our break in 5 minutes, maybe the commissioners have some questions to put. Brief questions. Bishop, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I am Commissioner James Alenia Wodiko. Now, on the 22nd, you mentioned that there were groups of junior officers who participated in that exercise. And you also mentioned, I think it's Lieutenant Obi Biden, if I'm right, that was placed in the same cell as yourself. Now, could you kindly tell me what happened to all the other senior officers and the Nigerian, Nigerian training group, the senior officers of the Nigerian training group? What happened to them?
First, I guess by exercise you're referring to this coup. All the other officers, like I said, to my disappointment, almost all of them who came at the day, most of them didn't come because probably they had the news. Most of them who came, of course, either joined or had to be locked up. And I cited the case of Modu Sonko, who joined them and worked with them to Banjul. The Nigerians, for that matter, because I think the coupists were cognizant of the fact that these are foreigners and that nothing should happen to them. At that, I don't think they came to the barracks at that time at all, because there was no incident that affected them in any way or form. But Obimba, yes, I met because he was the duty officer the night of the 21st, and he was the only duty officer I met in the barracks. I became the first officer who came for work who was arrested for this coup in 1994.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Carr. Welcome to you.
Commissioner Carr, I have two questions. The first is, you observed that Edward was drunk during that point. Was it the same for the other coup leaders that you came into contact with? That's the first. The second is, you also, at what point in your detention did your family come to know about your whereabouts?
Well, yes, at mile 2, when Edward visited, I know he was drunk because you see it in him. My family, I don't know what point they came to know, but I know that, I wouldn't know when they got to know my fate. But they were part of those visitations. When visits started, they were part of the group that came to visit me. But I wouldn't know really when they learned of my predicament. Even including that I was alive or not.
Thank you. Commissioner Kinte.
Commissioner Kinte, you mentioned that to your dismay, most of the senior officers easily surrendered. And subsequently, you received information in your cell that the Fajara barracks was also taken over so easily. Was it the same for the line, all the line along, especially at the bridge? Did you have any information how easily it was taken over, and subsequently all the other places until State House?
Yes, that was the situation, because these tidbits of information start keeping, because remember, that's the guard room. That's where all started. So this information still keep coming in.
Yes, I was disappointed that Fajara Barracks will fall that quick. But then having seen Amadou Suarez's testimony yesterday, I can see why. Because if you could conduct yourself like this, I mean, I really didn't get it. Really didn't get it. Because, but again, probably it's again the training. Because look, if you are a gendarmerie officer, it is not equivalent to an army officer or army trained. These are two different separate branches, arms of security service. And I think one of the problems, this is where we all got it wrong, because at some point we were trying to equate each other, trying to even believe, like he was trying to testify, that what the army have, you should have. These are two different set of security services. Their TOE, their manning is completely different. Their mandates are completely different. So this is the situation. And again, seeing an army officer or an officer like that conduct yourself like that, I mean, I just don't know how to describe it. I just don't know how to describe it, because there was no point in doing what you did. No point at all. You were given instructions, you follow them. And the men you are talking about at the bridge, all the way to Banjul, these are uniformed men who were there. If you had, we have seen history is repeat with instances where small group of men committed and determined could stop a huge force to do anything. That was utter betrayal of any oath that you took to serve your country.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners? If not, Mr. Gomez, you came to the conclusion that the presence of the Nigerian officers here didn't have anything to do with the coup, if I understood you correctly. Can you expound a bit more on that? Thank you.
No, I didn't conclude that way. I am not absolving anything. What I will take exception to, well, not exception, but I will have a differing perspective, is that to center what happened in 1994, that it was as a result of the Nigerians' presence within the army. I don't think that is true. I don't think that is true. It may have that cause. The first reason to look at is, if there is any disgruntlement, it would have been the senior officers who were affected. It would have been they who would have led this coup. But that didn't happen. This idea of disconnect between army officers and the men, to me, again, that's individual thing. Because in an army, you have a structure and the chain of command and information that I was alluding to. You have second lieutenants or platoon commanders commanding their platoons. You have captains commanding these second lieutenants. If men were disgruntled, it was their job to relay this upwards so that these were redressed and then actions were taken. So this is the exception I have, that we want to single out the Nigerians as the cause to the coup d'etat. That is not the case. I don't think so.
Thank you very much for that clear explanation. If there are no further questions, we would take our 1 hour break and resume at 2:30. Council, is there any point, any question that you want to raise before we adjourn?
Not at all, Mr. Chairman. We can break. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you very much. See you at 2:30. Meeting is adjourned.
you.